Marvel's Phoenix Man, The Ultimate Power Rises. Please like, share, and subscribe. Episode 101. The expected situation of the Thunder God Thor with his companions did not appear. After those Asgardians appeared, they quickly left. That Thunder God Thor was one of the gods of the Asa God clan. After restoring the power of the gods, it was naturally extremely powerful. He sensed Leon's line of sight, and turned his head to look at Leon. The two men's line of sight penetrated the barrier of space and looked together. Leon only felt that there seemed to be 10,000 thunderbolts flashing in front of him, each of which contained the power of opening the sky, which made him extremely surprised. Was this thunder god in the dark passage enhanced his power through some method? Otherwise, this thunder would not have carried a trace of the power of deep information in the universe. And Thor saw from Leon's line of sight the boundless sea of fire, as deep as a deep valley, as if it could swallow all things, a majesty he had only experienced in his father. The two looked at each other for a moment, and then staggered their eyes. Thor unconsciously flashed a fine electric glow under Leon's gaze, while Leon was still calm. "What's wrong, Thor?" Thor's companion asked. Thor turned back, suppressed the restless divine power in his body, took a deep breath before saying, "Nothing, let's leave quickly. I have a palpitation, what about you?" The man who opened his mouth said again. The rest glanced at each other and nodded at the same time. "Me too, it seems very dangerous here." "Yes, let's leave quickly, but why didn't the Midgarder show up? Shouldn't they come and greet us after we've been here?" Someone asked doubtfully. "Don't worry about that, I brought this stuff," Thor said as he pulled out a cell phone. "This is a Midgard creation, and I can contact each other anywhere and show me how to use it." He groped for half a day, finally dialed the number, and a moment later the phone was connected. He heard the words of the person on the phone, and the others looked at him, and they were all a little curious about the phone. Asgard can also be regarded as a civilization, but unfortunately, the people in this civilization are born with strong flesh, contain divine power themselves, and are proficient in magic, so all their creations are almost all made of magic, such as mobile phones, and they do not understand its principle. After a few moments, Thor hung up the phone and said, "Go, get out of here, someone will pick us up outside." After saying that, he led his companion away, but before leaving, he looked back, and then he found that Leon's gaze was still fixed here, and that gaze was fixed on him like substance, making him feel like a man. Damn, did father say that the man was? It's a bad feeling, he must be very powerful. After being exiled, Thor's heart matured, at least not as impulsive and belligerent as before, and Leon gave him the feeling of extreme danger, which put him under a lot of pressure. Leon, on the other hand, withdrew his gaze after the men had left, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he found that things were getting more and more interesting. Since there are external forces interfering, then I can also let go of my hands and feet. With this in mind, Leon directly commanded Svija, "From now on, lift the restrictions on the soldiers, start to expand the number of soldiers with all your might, and in addition, the invasion plan can begin." "All right, sir." The plan of aggression is to use the soldiers to expand around and occupy more areas, because it is already a war, and if Leon only uses himself as a combat force to threaten the whole world, that threat is not the strongest, but if thousands of soldiers form an army-like force, then the threat is all round. He has been controlling the external pressure. Some are afraid that too much pressure will make the world collapse quickly, but he is also worried that the pressure is too small, so that the world will not feel his threat. To tell the truth, he has made a lot of efforts to become a qualified villain. "Sir, there are now 3,672 soldiers, and if you produce them with all your strength, you can produce 300 in a day." Svija rode. Leon shook his head and commanded, "Such a speed is still too slow, although the combat strength of a single soldier is outstanding, but if it does not form a numerical advantage, it will not play much role at all. There are many countries in the world, weapons can destroy the soldiers, so from now on, go all out to expand the number of soldiers, first line 10 production lines." "Okay sir, I'll do it." Svija rode. "Send out the existing soldiers, and start spreading around." "Yes, sir." The order was given, each soldier received his order, and then all of them went out, and in an instant, thousands of soldiers flew out of the entire sword-shaped building, in groups of 3, and spread out in all directions. He now occupies only the area of Manhattan neighborhoods, and now most of New York has become an empty city because of his connections, and outside Manhattan, 3 kilometers around, there are quite a few garrison troops, the main purpose of which is to monitor and defend him. And on this very day, these armies suffered a catastrophe. Every soldier has a very high level of ability, and these can only be subprograms that Svija splits off, and is controlled by it, so the execution of Leon's orders is naturally done meticulously. The flames of war are raging around Manhattan. This is a real war. One side is a powerful human army, and the other side is a combination of technology and mutant capabilities, and from the beginning of the contact, the full combat power has erupted. Human artillery will not cause any damage to the soldiers, but it cannot stand the human side of the artillery is sufficient, all kinds of shells and elixirs as if they do not want money to vent on the soldiers. Once or twice is good, every time is so, even the soldiers will be damaged. After all, the number of soldiers is in an absolute weakness. However, the combat strength of the individual soldiers is superhuman level, so it does not take much time at all, and on every battlefield, the soldiers have already occupied an advantage and dominant position. Yes, the battlefield around Manhattan was divided into several places, because there were no less than 10 troops stationed here, and these troops were destroyed at this moment, and in less than half a day, they were destroyed. Episode 102, the destruction of more than a dozen garrison troops alarmed the entire United States in one fell swoop, and all the people experienced the cruelty of war from this incident, and also felt the horror of Leon, the ability that was completely like a god, and these terrible soldiers, which had almost become the nightmare of ordinary people. The total number of troops stationed in the garrison was more than 30,000, and of these 30,000 people, no less than 60% were killed in battle, and the rest were rapidly defeated, and the defensive line retreated again and again, and by the end of the contact war, the defensive line of the garrison army had retreated beyond New York, and the combat strength was no longer one. As soon as this news came out, it shocked the whole world in one fell swoop. The whole country of America boiled over. The people's resentment was like fire, and countless people were afraid of Leon at the same time. They also clamored to eliminate him, and even more demanded that the government quickly send more troops to annihilate him in one fell swoop. But then these clamoring people were stunned by another heavy news. A 3 million equivalent nuclear bomb exploded hundreds of meters above Manhattan, but Manhattan was not damaged at all, because the energy of the explosion was directly swallowed up and absorbed by Leon. Even though the American government wanted to keep it secret and conceal it, the images quickly spread all over the world. And these images are naturally transmitted by Leon, whose purpose is to make the whole world panic, so as to burst into greater potential. People are very strange animals. When danger comes, they will choose to escape, but when they know that danger is not around, they will do nothing, and even have a lot of strange thoughts. And what Leon has to do is to let all people be under the fear he brings, so that in despair and fear, they will erupt more resistance and more potential. A person playing a single machine is very boring, and what is more boring is to watch others play games. Leon, as the leader of this game, is naturally fully involved in it. He is so engaged. If others are not invested, it has really left him speechless. And his idea was realized, and when ordinary people knew that they themselves were going to face a monster that was not afraid of nuclear bombing, they showed more fear than ever before. And it is this move of Leon, but it is an unexpected stimulation of the unity of ordinary people. At this time everyone understands one thing: Leon, the enemy of this world, absolutely 10 times more terrifying than he imagined, is now the fall of New York. In a period of time, it may be the entire United States. When danger comes to you, no one is spared. In this social environment, many people have abandoned their own dead hearts and begun to unite and contribute their strength to defeat Leon. Social order improved rapidly in less than a week, and although the financial order collapsed, the country's credit was still there, so the American government quickly made adjustments, although it was avoidable, but at least it preserved the role of money, so that the whole country hovered on the edge of the cliff. Everyone knows that behind it is the abyss, and if you don't change it, you are looking for death. Looking at the country united under his own role, Leon did not worry a little, but showed a long-lost smile. In his opinion, a united and capable country can make him feel a little pressure, otherwise, such a life is much more boring. Very well, I am very relieved to see that you can resist like this, and in order to reward you, I will add another fire to you. Leon is not planning to toss the United States this time, but to drop a bombshell on the world. On this day, Leon appeared over the Middle East, to be precise, over Saudi Arabia, overlooking this land full of yellow sand and hot heat, and the countries on which a glorious civilization was built. Saudi Arabia is also the world's largest oil storage country, and the oil stock of its oil fields has reached a staggering 40 billion tons. He had almost destroyed the monetary system represented by the gold standard, and what he had to do now was to destroy the entire world's oil industry. Well, let's get started. Leon muttered so low, and then the figure disappeared in an instant, and when he reappeared, he had already appeared in an oil field, which was like a fiery construction site, and behind it was a huge facility factory for crude oil extraction and storage, and on the oil field stood a series of kowtow machines for extracting oil. He was now standing next to a kowtow, and the movement between the extremes was very small, only an extremely low humming sound, and according to the oil reserves here, every time the kowtow machine prostrated, it could extract about $50 worth of oil, and it was conceivable that this extraction was not oil at all, but money. Beep beep beep. Li Ang's sudden appearance suddenly made the guards here find that someone was whistling and running over. This person was still holding this gun, pointing at Leon to make a sound, but when the people saw Li Ang's face, their faces became extremely frightened. Leon looked at the person who came, his face seemed to be smiling, and then in the frightened eyes of this person, a kick was kicked on the prostration machine, and suddenly there was a roar, and the huge prostrating machine was kicked by him and flew out for tens of meters, directly becoming a pile of scrap iron. In that one extraction hole, brown crude oil directly emerged, spraying out more than 10 meters high, forming a small fountain. Ah! Ah! The man stood there dumbfounded, screaming in an unclear sense of meaning, but for a moment he forgot to run away. This is the economic lifeblood of your country. You are a country on oil, so I want to ask you, if oil disappears, what will you become? Leon opened his mouth, and the Arabic opened his mouth and came. Then with a stroke of his hand, a large clump of crude oil flew into his hand, and the causes converged into a clump and surged in his hand, and the little bit of his other hand on the clump of crude oil produced a strange change. From the position where he clicked, the crude oil gradually became clear, fading its brown color until the entire liquid mass of crude oil became clear. You have so much to have, but there is a natural lack of water, and I am the one who can't stand the suffering of others, so I will turn all the oil into water, which is the root of your survival. Well, no need to thank me. Episode 103, huh? The man had become terrifying because of Leon's presence, and until this time he had not returned to God. His body was trembling and retreating backwards, trying to escape from Leon, a terrifying creature. Leon did not go to embarrass this person, but just looked at him with a light smile, and the latter's body suddenly stiffened, and the legs that wanted to retreat were no longer heated. This kind of epic-making upheaval, of course, there must be a witness. You come to be this witness. Leon said, throwing the transparent liquid mass in his hand out, falling in the direction of the crude oil fountain. The two touched. The change began from the point of contact. The brown crude oil that is sprayed out instantly becomes clear without a trace of impurities, and then this change quickly spreads from the fountain down to the underground, and transmits this change through the pipeline to the underground oil field. If someone has the ability to see, he can see the changes in the oil field below. Countless reasons, like a chain reaction, there are strange changes between the substances, the molecular structure of the oil is rapidly changed, the crucial chemical bonds are changed, so that the matter itself has undergone earth-shaking changes. Leon now has the ability to manipulate subatomically, and can easily change the existence of matter itself, like what is turning into gold, which is basically the simplest change. He turned oil into water, which was a very fast process, but it would take a day or two to spread to the entire oil field. After all, the oil reserves in this oil field were extremely terrible, and it would take a certain amount of time to convert all of it from oil to water. It was a chain reaction. He injected enough energy into this change, and enough to support this change to continue, and when everyone reacted, the change was already irreversible, and he was looking forward to what the expression on the faces of those in power would be like when the time came. Thinking about it, he laughed unconsciously, very cheerfully, as if the prank had succeeded, and this laughter also woke up the person, suddenly issued a scream, turned his head and ran backwards quickly. But Leon waved at him, and the man struggled and flew back with a scream, landing firmly beside him. Leon put his arm around his shoulders, no matter how trembling his body was, pointing to the fountain and whispering in his ear, "Look, now you are not short of water. I have injected an energy into the ground. This energy will cause the groundwater to continue to erupt for 100 years without exhaustion. From now on, you will have a huge lake, no longer have to worry about the water source." He also patted the man's shoulder. "What, open unhappy? No need to thank me." He said that his thoughts moved, and his mind controlled a lump of clear water and floated in front of the man, and he said in a demagogic tone, "You must be thirsty. Taste it. This thing is not ordinary water. I have added several minerals to it." What is the advertising slogan? Nongfu Mountain Spring. Yes, this spring water is sweet. The water ball floated in front of the man, and the man had already been given by Leon. At this time it was only a mechanical opening, swallowing the fist-sized ball of water. As for whether the spring water was sweet or not, this man had no intention of paying attention, and he was now full of fear and the incomparable despair after reacting. "Very good, it seems that you are very satisfied, so I am relieved," Leon said and patted his shoulder again, and his shocked gaze disappeared directly, until Leon left for several minutes, and then the person reacted with a fierce spirit, and a scream came out, and he quickly turned his head and ran towards the factory area behind. Instead of going back, Leon went to another place, the world's second largest oil producer, Wolf, where he did the same, followed by Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, and Canada. His footsteps traveled all over the world in one day, leaving behind the energy of transformation in every oil field, so that all large and small oil fields in the world began to change. He had in his head the exact coordinates of almost all the oil fields in the world, which allowed him to make no mistakes and complete the task in one day. And Liang's deeds in several large oil fields were also successfully known, and then the news spread like wings, and in the next 2 days, the news spread like an explosion, quickly spreading all over the world. The news that oil has become fresh water has once again shocked the world. All the countries panicked. As the main energy source of industrial development, the status of oil is not comparable to gold. Now all the world has a production area and no more oil, which is like a sentence that crushed the world's industrial system at that time. Leon first destroyed the entire world's financial system, and then destroyed oil energy. Compared with the collapse of the financial system, the lack of oil will bring more terrible disasters to the whole world. The whole world was boiling again, and Liang's hand was so vicious that it suddenly stuck in the face of all the countries in the world. Despair quickly spread throughout the world, and Liang told all countries a truth with practical actions, that is, do not underestimate him, otherwise the consequences are really serious. But even though all countries have taken him seriously, his actions still shock everyone, and the consequences are too serious. The oil system collapsed, and the industrial system suffered a huge shock, followed by the loss of all major energy sources and the rapid decline of national power. As the world superpower, the United States has a lot of crude oil reserves, which are enough to hold out for 9 months in the war, but after these 9 months, the oil is really gone. At present, there is only one thing before all countries: how to get out of this predicament, but in the end, no country has thought of countermeasures. At this time, Liang was sitting on the deck chair on the terrace with a smile, enjoying a rare leisure time, and he now wanted to see how the countries of the world would react. Will it be directly united because of this hand? He thought about it and thought it was very possible, but unfortunately he did not know the result until the end. Episode 104. The result still surprised him, even if human society was forced to the brink of collapse by his life, but by this time, some powerful countries still did not unite together. This made him feel a little strange. Obviously everyone knew that uniting together was more capable of resisting him, but no one was willing to do so, which made Leon feel that things were unpredictable, and even he could not control everything in his hands. Things did not go as he expected, but the consequences of the collapse of the oil system, as he had predicted, would have been enormous for all countries. At this moment, many countries are in a kind of collapse of the change, such as the United States, such as the Ying country, such as Japan, the United States of America's national strength. Oil reserves are enough countries to run for more than 9 months, but the Ying country and Japan are not so lucky. Such countries themselves are very scarce in resources, extremely dependent on imports, and the oil industry is the crown of all industries, and now this crown is lost, so that such a country is seriously injured. It has been inferred that import-dependent countries such as Ying and Japan can only hold out for a month at most before they will collapse. What Leon did not expect was that the war between him and the United States would come very quickly, and this time it was not the original heroes, or the mutant Brotherhood people, but the Asgardians. Thor, the god of thunder, was the first to appear in front of him, and his companions behind him also appeared outside the sword-shaped building, but the few destroyers who came to Earth with Thor did not appear here. Asgardians, why are you involved in this war? Leon asked curiously. He did not show any anger, some were just simple curiosity. Because my father told me that you will be a disaster for the whole universe, we must stop your evil deeds. Because of your actions, there have been too many ordinary people in Midgard who have died, which are caused by your actions, and in our view, you are a tumor in this world that must be eradicated. Thor cut through the railway. His battle intent was rising, the divine power was condensing in his body, and a small electric current had already begun to move on his body. Liang raised an eyebrow and smiled. Are you so sure of your father's words? What if he said it was incorrect? It is impossible, you are our enemy. This has been predestined since you invaded Asgard and seized the treasure in the father's treasury. So what I say is useless, and I am officially declaring war on you today on behalf of Asgard, and you will taste the wrath of Asgard. Thor, the god of thunder, is very strong. It can be said that Asgard has little fighting power, especially now he does not know how to use to stimulate his own divine power, so that he raises his hands and feet with the majesty of a natural roar. The electric light wrapped around him, weaving a piece of thunder and lightning armor for him, and his eyes turned a brilliant silver color, shining and unable to see clearly, only electric light converged in it. And none of the companions who followed him were weak, and any one of them had the strength of an almost alpha-level mutant. Thor, the god of thunder, and his party can seriously say that they can be regarded as the strongest combat force on the earth at this time, and he may feel that he has the capital to challenge Leon, but Leon actually tells him how ridiculous his idea is. Snap. With a snap of his fingers, the movement of Thor and his companions suddenly stopped, and they were completely fixed in mid-air. At this time one by one looked like they were dancing with their teeth and claws, which looked quite ridiculous. Liang directly froze this piece of time and space, which was now completely separated from the real time and space. He smiled and looked at the people in front of him. The thunder light was still wrapped around the body of Thor, the god of thunder, and even he could see the lightning bolt that exploded at the end of the thunder and lightning, and the blazing thunderbolt on his hammer. He just shook his head indifferently, although the thunder god Thor was powerful, but for him now, he was just a slightly larger ant, and it was extremely simple for Leon to kill him. With a flicker of his body, Liang appeared in front of Thor, the god of thunder, and stretched out his finger to flick on his forehead, directly coming to a brain breakdown. Subsequently, he lifted the spacetime around Thor. Phew. Thor didn't even know what was happening, and with a sharp pain in his head, his body flew out uncontrollably, flying hundreds of meters and crashing into a tall building. He wanted to subtract, but found that the momentum of this retreat he could not control at all. He was smashed straight into a building, stirring up a flurry of debris, and he was buried in it. Cough cough. Thor struggled from the rubble to get up, but now he felt his whole body go weak, and the pain in his brain made him scream. It felt like someone had punched him in the head. Ah. He finally got up from the ruins, his body still shaking a little, and the arcs of electricity wrapped around his body also looked a little weak. He suddenly looked up, and saw Leon floating in the distance in midair, looking at him with a smile. You. What did you just do? He couldn't help but ask in a startled voice. Leon shrugged and said, I didn't do anything, I just gave you a look. Unfortunately, you are not the real god in the universe, the power is still too weak for me. If I had used the strength a little bit earlier, you would have become a corpse by now. Impossible. Thor couldn't believe that the person in front of him had knocked him down with just one blow, which made him, who had always been arrogant, somewhat unacceptable. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not, because that's the truth and can't be changed. Leon was still smiling, but there was no joy in his smile, and some of his eyes were just plain. Thor touched his forehead, where there was a big bag. It was knocked out by Liang's finger. He slightly touched the pain of the heart. He did not even see Liang's movements. He had already been so confused and defeated, which made him extremely unwilling. Damn. He roared in anger, gathered his divine power again, and pounced on Liang fiercely. Episode 105. At this time, Thor was surrounded by thousands of thunderbolts, and the brilliant electric snake thunderbolt was incessant, and it was as vigorous as the center of a thunderstorm, carrying thousands of powers and leaping towards Liang. Boom. His speed directly exceeded the speed of sound, bringing a series of sonic boom sounds, and even more shockwaves spread around him again. Such an ability did have the right to be called a god. Unfortunately, such a god is only compared to ordinary people, and for Leon, it is still just a slightly more powerful individual. Thor rushed out like a meteor at this time, and the huge reaction force made the tall buildings he smashed into shake as if they were about to collapse at any moment. Its speed was like thunder, and in an instant, it had already appeared in front of Liang with a fierce wind, holding aloft the hammer of the god of Thor, mixed with majestic strength and thousands of electric snakes, and smashed down on Liang's hood. Boom. The movement of this moment was almost like a thunderstorm. The air seemed to be scorched. Liang looked up at the dazzling electric glow, but he unconsciously laughed softly, and did not see any movement from him, and the space in front of him suddenly cracked a hole. It was as if a passage had been opened on the curtain of space, and this opening was the door of the passage, which appeared very suddenly, and opened in an instant, just like a huge mouth of the abyss that chose to devour people, directly swallowing the thunder god Thor. Hum. With only a hum, the crack in space contracted, and the structure of space returned to its original state, as if nothing had happened, but Thor, the god of thunder, had indeed disappeared. Only at this time did several magic runes appear around Liang, crystal clear, like space itself, and like gems, reflecting a little crystal. With his hands pulled apart, a FA array appeared in each of his hands, and with his movements, a crack was opened in the air not far in front of him, and then a figure rushed out, and when he saw that he was about to land, a crack appeared in front of this person, swallowing him again. And Thor's figure once again fell out of the crack above, then fell into the crack below, and then fell all the way down in an infinite loop. Ought to be supposed to be ought to be ought to after. The figure had blurred into a shadow. Dead 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 dead. The sounds also converged into one, and the tail dragged the elder, and Thor fell directly into this infinite loop of drop mode. And Leon only had a slight smile on his face, and his eyes fell on several companions who followed Thor, each of whom had extremely powerful power and destructive power, but now they were strangely fixed in mid-air, without any movement. Snap. Leon slapped his finger again, and as he struck his finger, the space around him began to ripple, and then these ripples began to spread, killing the bodies of those people. From Liang's point of view, the bodies of those few people were stretched and shrunk in the ripples, so that each time the changes would cause their bodies to crack, the muscles and bones would break, the blood would splash, just a few breathing efforts, under the disturbance of the ripples of space, the bodies of these people would be torn to pieces. Until the ripples of space stopped and the essence of space was restored to its original state, a few pops, those few people did not even have time to say a word, they went directly to see their god king, and became a beach of rotten flesh, and the dead could no longer die. He didn't kill Thor, he just wanted to see if he could grow up again, but for minions, it was not such good luck. After all, it was not the protagonist's life, and death was inevitable. At this time, the thunder god Thor is still in the case of continuous falling, and Leon has no intention of letting him go at this time, perhaps because of the evil taste. This scene makes people feel familiar. Under a series of screams, Thor's figure was almost impossible to see, and in the two space cracks, only a long black shadow could be seen connecting the two cracks, which was formed by Thor's remnants. Just like that, more than half an hour passed directly. Liang waved his hand, the two space cracks disappeared instantly, and Thor's figure fell directly in front of him with a sigh. At this time, Thor still had a little bit of the majesty of the god of thunder, and smashed a pit more than a meter deep on the ground, and his grey head and dirty face were not messy, and he did not get up at all. Huh? Liang found that something was wrong, waved his hand again, and a space crack formed more than 10 meters above Thor. Uh-huh. A silver-white object fell rapidly with a cold light. Boo. Ah. With a muffled sound and a scream, Thor's newly erected body fell down again, and his forehead suddenly oozed blood. Smashing him was nothing else, it was the hammer he had lost in the infinite fall, not to mention why he was a god who could not hold the hammer. The reason was very simple. Leon was very funny when he fell, exerted a little gravity on him. This gravity easily disrupted his own balance, so that he who had originally fallen vertically, began to roll in the process of falling. Just like the drum washing machine, it fell for more than half an hour, and also rolled over for more than half an hour. If it was an ordinary person, it is estimated that he would have died because of the blood disorder in his body, but Thor was only dizzy and dizzy. He gasped and struggled again, the hammer that had just hit him on the head like a hammer, with a lot of force, and now it had not recovered. Vomit. Leon grinned, and Thor threw up. After a long time, the thunder god Thor stood up. At this time his body was still unstable, shaking violently, and Leon's figure was divided into several in his eyes. You. Damn, vomit. Before he could finish speaking, he bent down again and threw up. Leon took a few steps back without a trace, pulled away from him, looked at him quite amusedly, and without waiting for him to say anything more, he said directly, "You are too weak, and now you even have no interest in letting me kill with my hands. If you want to stop me, or want to kill me, then become stronger." Episode 106. Leon's voice was very flat to the point of no fluctuation, and Thor, the god of thunder, raised his head in anger and glared at him fiercely, but his body trembled because of the long period of falling and turning, and the after effects had not subsided, and his combat strength did not exist. He didn't say anything cruel anymore, because he also knew very well in his heart that just this hand of Liang playing with space had already made him invincible, and he wanted to defeat it, and it was impossible without the corresponding means and ability. Unfortunately, he doesn't have those abilities right now. What about my companions? Thor reacted suddenly. Leon shrugged, as you can see, they're all dead. What? Thor's body was shaken, and he felt as if he hadn't heard clearly, and then an irrepressible anger filled his heart, and he roared with great reluctance, no longer caring about the discomfort of his body, and with a wave of the hammer, he flew into his hand, and his body bloomed with electricity again, and then another impact on Liang. You give me to die. He was furious, and this anger seemed to be transformed into a substantial anger, wanting to completely devour Leon. In the face of Thor's angry blow, Leon just waved his hand lightly, and the space in front of him cracked again. Thor had already prepared this time. While Leon waved his hand, his forward thrust route was strangely folded, and he could dodge the space crack. Thor's eyes were filled with anger and he stared at Leon, but when he saw the sarcastic look in Leon's eyes, his heart was shocked, and then before he could react, he felt a flower in front of his eyes, followed by a sudden lightness of his body, and a strange sense of weightlessness appeared again. Shouldn't it be? Dead. With another series of angry screams, Thor was once again caught in the fall of that perpetual motion mode, and this time more uncomfortable than before, surrounded by all kinds of strange gravitational forces that made his body rotate several times faster than Feng Kai. What was even more strange was that Liang's voice was still ringing at this time. I said, Gua, at this time you are not my opponent at all. Look at your father's face. I spare your life. Welcome to seek revenge on me, but next time, the trouble becomes stronger. At least give me some freshness. In the face of you now, to tell the truth is really boring. Leon was going to give him another half an hour to experience the fall, and Thor had woken up, and although the hatred in his heart was still there, at least not as crazy as before. He took a few hard breaths, then yelled in his throat, Heimdall. Just as the sound fell, a colorful and dazzling beam of light fell from the sky and shone on the body of Thor, the god of thunder, and Thor, who was still falling, disappeared in an instant in this rainbow light. Liang looked at the rainbow bridge light that soared straight into the sky, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face, and he did not want to chase it. Because in his opinion, the appearance of Thor, the god of thunder, is simply a very insignificant thing. He waved his hand slightly, as if to say goodbye to Thor. In fact, his gaze had already penetrated the rainbow bridge and made eye contact with Heimdall, the guardian of Asgard. The eyes of the two pierced through the limitations of time and space, looking at each other from afar. Liang smiled lightly, and Heimdall was solemn. Eventually, the teleportation light of the rainbow bridge disappeared, and Heimdall's sight disappeared with it. Leon turned around directly, did not pay attention to this matter anymore, turned his head and focused on other things. He did not have much to do now, but there were many things to pay attention to. For example, the change of the world pattern. Because of his several moves, the world has undergone repeated changes. First of all, the collapse of the financial order, followed by the change of oil, the reorganization of the industrial system, and the pattern of the whole world has changed again and again, which seems to be a storm. In less than a week, more than 20 small states in the world had collapsed, regimes had been overthrown, and they had been reduced to a place of complete chaos. And the losses of other countries are also enormous, and those countries that do not have much oil reserves have borne the brunt of the victims, and the whole country has fallen into turmoil, and this turmoil has intensified, and the government has soon lost credibility. Time flies fast, and in the blink of an eye, it is more than half a month, and in these half a month, one war after another is being staged. Yes, but wars, which were not initiated by Leon, but by the turmoil he had caused, and humanity had once again shown its inferiority before him, and even in the face of one of the most terrible mutants of all time, even though order had fallen to the brink of collapse, there were still quite a few careerists who had emerged. Some people think of themselves as saviors and gather a lot of helpers around them, while others simply want to overthrow the old order and establish a new regime and order, and these people have no regard for the lives of ordinary people and only care about whether they can get any benefits from it. What makes Leon even more ridiculous is that someone has openly contacted him and wants to join forces with him to divide the whole world equally. Leon just sneered at this. If he really wanted to dominate the world, then there was no chance for these people. He could overthrow the entire United States in the shortest possible time, so as to establish a country of his own. But he did not have the heart to do so, because that was not what he was pursuing, and the ambitionist did not know his ideals and wild hopes, and the rat's eyes were inches away, and he would always only stare at the acre and 3 points of the earth. To this kind of person, Leon said that he did a good job. Yes, he didn't try to stop it, because that's what he was happy to see. At least it was a spur to the existing order on Earth, a pressure on other ordinary people, and he was looking forward to whether others in the world would fight back. He knew that the United States had not given up its resistance to him, but it had been a little silent for a while. Even though the soldiers had advanced hundreds of miles outward, he had not suffered any great resistance, and it felt as if the United States was accumulating strength and wanted to give him a fatal blow. This made him even more curious, and he didn't know what other plans the United States had in the dark, but he was very much looking forward to it. Episode 107, Dr. Punk, the experiment has reached the final step. The experimental material is still very stable, the values have not changed much, and it meets the requirements for continuing the experiment. Do you want to carry out the next step? In a highly concealed laboratory, there are many experimenters in white coats walking back and forth, all busy with the things in their hands. The lab was huge, at least 1,000 square meters, and there was a transparent enclosed chamber with an upright chamber filled with nutrient solution, and a stout man immersed in it. This is a man, more than 2 meters tall and 3 meters tall, a muscular body like steel casting, the skin presents a perfect bronze color, the face looks quite handsome, with the unique white logo edges and corners, and the eyebrows are even more fierce. Call me for the specific data. The doctor named Punk spoke. He was an old man, at least in his 60s, and although his body was slightly rickety, his mental state was very good, and the experimental assistant next to him handed him some information, and he looked at it as if no one was around. He nodded his head after half a moment. The data is no problem, the current physical strength of the experimenter can withstand the next experiment, but you all have to be careful. This is the owner of the only super soldier serum in the world. In order to get him, the government is almost going to fall out with S.H.I.E.L.D. Such experimental materials cannot be a problem. Yes, PhD, we have been very well prepared, and on such a basis, the experiment will not be problematic. The assistant assured. Dr. Punk nodded, then said, so. Finally, the last link of the weapons plan. Let's get started. Yes. The experimental assistant looked happy and hurried down to order, and he had reason to be excited, because it was a state-sponsored super project that brought together hundreds of experts and scholars in biology to build what they thought was the ultimate weapon to deal with that terrible catastrophe. And this disaster is naturally said to be Liang, but Liang does not know anything about it for the time being, because this laboratory is to ensure that secrets are not leaked in the form of physical disconnection, and Liang has a super-intelligent program around him, and the American government and intelligence agencies have long known, and such precautions also ensure that Liang cannot learn the news here. The establishment of this laboratory is not long, it is less than a month, but the current research results are very gratifying. After all, it is an experimental project formed by the power of the state, and the various funds and materials are very abundant, and the government has only one requirement, that is, to make this experiment successful no matter what. At this point, the experiment is only the last link, and what is currently underway is the final key step of the experiment. This was a top experiment in biology and genetics, and even the experimenter was not a mutant, but a poo who had been injected with the serum of a super soldier, and this experimenter was the captain of the United States who had been dug out of the sea. Yes, the experimental material is Captain Me himself, and even when he wakes up, he is sent to the laboratory by S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to create a final weapon to block and defeat Leon. At this point the lab became quiet, and many people stopped their work and watched quietly as they watched the man in the sealed cabin, waiting for the final results to be revealed. Captain Me was inserted into the body of several special pipes, and then each pipe had a different color of matter injected into it, and Captain Me was not awake, and even his own personality was about to collapse because of the previous experiments. But this is not an unacceptable thing for these experimenters. In order to succeed in the experiment, they will not care about the death of the experimenter, and the Captain of the United States is just a special experimental material in the eyes of these people. Captain Miko's body began to tremble, initially with a low frequency, and finally it had turned into a convulsion, and the nutrient solution that wrapped him in him began to bubble up like boiling water. The target heart rate has increased, brain activity has intensified, physical abnormalities have begun, and genetic level transformation has been completed by 36%. The lab assistant hurried to report the progress to Dr. Punk. Dr. Punk nodded, his eyes always on the sealed cabin, somewhat nervous. Half an hour passed quickly, and in that half an hour, the nutrient solution in the sealed cabin had become cloudy, revealing an eerie scarlet color, like blood water. That's because Captain Miko's skin cracked, piece by piece, and then quickly recovered, such a continuous destruction, and then repaired. The blood water has stained all the nutrient solution. The target brain domain activity has peaked, the intracranial temperature has risen by 40%, some brain tissue has been burned and is being reconstructed, and the genetic level transformation has been completed by 97%. The hearts of Dr. Punk and the experimenters had reached their peaks, and they all looked nervously at the people in the sealed cabin, as if they had become their hopes. Roar. The scarlet blood in the sealed cabin was churning and rolling, and the body of the Captain of the United States became thicker, his face showed the color of viciousness and pain, and his body struggled more and more, and the roar even came out through the sealed cabin. DD. At this moment, a series of sirens sounded, and the experimental assistant hurriedly reported loudly, the activity of the target brain domain has stopped, 90% of the brain tissue has been burned, and it is now growing again. The growth rate is extremely fast, and it is expected to complete the regeneration within 36 seconds. In addition, the degree of completion of transformation at the genetic level. 100%. Success, we succeed, Doctor. The experimental assistant jumped up, extremely excited. The expression on Dr. Punk's face was still nervous, and instead of opening his mouth, he was still staring at the sealed cabin, and under his gaze, more than 30 seconds passed quickly, and Captain Miko's body had dried up and returned to his original muscular appearance, at least the appearance was completely out of sight. Gollum. The nutrient solution was quickly extracted, and then the sealed cabin was opened, and the Captain of the United States fell to the ground. Episode 108. The whole laboratory became silent again, and everyone was nervously watching the figure that had fallen to the ground. At this time, the Captain of the United States was full of red fruit, and his height had changed completely compared to when he was salvaged, more than 2 meters and 3 meters tall, making him look like a giant. And the lean muscles of the whole body made him look majestic and extraordinary, full of a strong sense of strength. Without Dr. Punk's orders, someone had already stepped forward to carry Captain Me to a test bench and began to test him with various instruments. Soon, all kinds of data were out and then put in Dr. Punk's hands. The flesh is as strong as steel, even the anti-equipment sniper rifle cannot be broken, only a high-power concussion knife can cut through his skin, and then it will be stuck by muscle fibers. The recovery ability is extremely strong, the wound will have a very short bleeding, the time is not more than 0.7 seconds, and then the wound will recover in 1.6 seconds. The metabolism is 27 times that of ordinary people, can swallow energy, replace food. Cell division limits. Dismissed. The target character has achieved true immortality, the subject's personality has been completely destroyed, there is no self-knowledge, but the various functions of the brain are well preserved and can be instilled with new knowledge and cognition from the new. In the other 79, the X genes fuse very perfectly with each other, and there is no conflict between them. This is the most perfect experimental result. Dr. Punk couldn't help but tremble as he looked at the experimental data in his hand. It was his hard work these days, and it was the final weapon used against Leon, and now that the experiment was successful and the final weapon was completed. Ha ha ha. Dr. Punk burst out laughing, which quickly aroused the excitement of the others, and for a moment the entire lab was filled with laughter and cheers. At this moment, the captain of the rice country on the test bench suddenly sat up, and this change made the laughter of the whole laboratory stagnate, and everyone saw the captain of the country open his eyes. His eyes were full of confusion, he looked very unfocused, he couldn't see the aura of an ordinary person, and now he didn't look like a person, but more like a machine. What's going on? Why did he wake up on his own before he had given the target the order to wake up? Dr. Punk asked hurriedly. The experimental assistant on the side was also a little surprised, hurried over to call up the data, and then was surprised. The subject is not awake, His brain activity is only 3%, which is not enough for him to wake up from his current state, and he has no personality and self-awareness, which should be an instinctive reaction. Roar. At this moment, the captain of the United States roared at his head, his face became distorted, and his face was full of pain. Quick, inject him with a large dose of super tranquilizer. The experimental scene hurried up. Suddenly, someone stepped forward to operate the experiment. A rapidly concussing blade cut the skin on the back of the captain of the United States, and at the same time, a needle made of Edelman alloy pierced into his back, and a large tube of super tranquilizer was injected into the body of the captain of the United States. Captain Miko's body sparkles. After a quick calm, but no one saw his eyes, but there was a variety of inconspicuous luster shimmering. The subject was controlled. The experimental assistant breathed a sigh of relief. But somehow, Dr. Punk raised a warning from his heart, and then he saw Captain Mill's body tremble again, and this frequency became higher and higher. What the hell is going on? Dr. Punk exclaimed. And at this time, the sound of bone joints breaking suddenly came from the body of the captain of the United States, and the sound of clicking and clicking was incessant, and when everyone was shocked, they saw that the body of the United States began to expand, and the body became like a liquid, which began to surge, and the surface even rippled. Poof. Then Captain Miko's body exploded violently, shattering into 4 clumps of flesh and blood, scattered on the ground next to the test bench, some of which showed the color of skin, some of which looked like a ball of blood, some of which were a strange brown, and the other was Captain Mikoku. Yes, the captain of the United States was in these 4 clusters of flesh and blood. He alone occupied one of the masses of flesh and blood. This mass of flesh and blood quickly formed his head, followed by shoulders, then chest and limbs, in just a few moments. This mass of flesh and blood became a captain of the United States of America who was more than 1 meter 8. This lump of flesh and blood turned into the captain of the United States, still with a little mucus on his body, but now his body size is much smaller than before, although he is still muscular, but it looks like he has just been dug out of the glacier. The other 3 clusters of flesh and blood substance continued to squirm, and the blood also formed a human form, the same as the captain of the United States, but his eyes were red, and the expression on his face was also very fierce. Another captain of the United States, composed of flesh and blood, his eyes showed a dull black, he had fangs, and from time to time there were drops of saliva in his mouth, which landed on the alloy floor, instantly corroding it out of a small pit. The last captain of the United States, in a strange state of deformity, had 4 hands, and there was a liquid dripping down his body, and before the liquid could land on the ground, it had already turned into steam, and this steam quickly spread in the laboratory. Ah! Suddenly, a closer experimenter screamed loudly. He scratched his body with his hands, and soon his own flesh and blood were blurred, but he seemed to have a sense of taste, and even directly ripped off his own trachea, and his body pulled out and fell. But a more strange scene appeared, and the experimenter's body began to melt rapidly, until a moment later it melted into a pool of blood. What's going on here? Dr. Punk's voice trembled. Ah. 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 A series of screams rang out, and by this time it had already been discovered that all the people who were screaming were people who had been exposed to the steam of bodily fluids, and they were scratching their bodies like the first experimenters, and after a few moments they became blurred with blood and flesh. Ah. There was another scream, but it was the red-eyed Captain Migwa, who appeared behind an experimenter at some point, and directly tore this person into 2 pieces. Episode 109. In less than a minute, the whole experiment became like purgatory. Many experimenters fell one after another, some of them directly turned into blood, and some people's bodies were torn into several sections, and the death was very miserable. At this moment, another captain of the United States moved, and his hands turned into 2 blades, moving back and forth in the field like a whirlwind, harvesting the lives of the experimenters. The 3 captains of the United States in the field were destroying the laboratory, and only the normal-looking captain of the United States was still stupid, but he then turned his eyes to the walls of the laboratory. Ah! Run! Finally someone reacted and quickly thought of fleeing, but this person's voice attracted the attention of a captain of the United States, and then he saw a flash of cold light, and this person's body was directly cut into more than a dozen points, killing him instantly. The 3 captains of the United States instantly turned into the god of death, harvesting life in this laboratory. Dr. Punk's body was shaking, and he wanted to escape, but his feet were like lead, his body was trembling so badly. At this time, his whole body was completely filled with fear. 50 or 60 experimenters in the laboratory were killed by these captains of the United States in a few moments, and Dr. Punk watched the scarlet American captain walking towards him, his body trembling even more, and he did not know where the courage came from, but instead pressed a button next to him. That button is the alarm system of the entire laboratory. In order to ensure the safety of the experiment, there is an alarm to the outside. As long as this button is pressed, the outside defense personnel will quickly enter the laboratory. The sharp siren soon sounded, and the alarm lights flashed throughout the laboratory, but this did not stop the captain of the United States from walking towards him, and Dr. Punk probably knew that he would not survive today, and could not help but fall to the ground, looking at the captain of the United States who was approaching him with fear. At this moment, the door of the laboratory was opened, and a team of heavily armed soldiers rushed in, and they were stunned to see the bloody scene, and then they saw the 4 captains of the United States. Quick! Organize them quickly. Shoot! I order you to shoot. When Dr. Punk saw the Comer, he immediately surged with hope and roared. The guards also reacted quickly, and the muzzle of the gun immediately began to spew tongues of fire, and a round of bullets poured out. The air rippled, and the scarlet-eyed captain of the United States reached out, and all the bullets hovered beside him, and then he shook his fist violently, and under a series of terrible screams, Dr. Punk was horrified to find that all the finishers had been squeezed into a ball of meat, which completely squeezed those people together, and suddenly a large piece of blood burst out. Dr. Punk was terrified. Dot was not frightened, he was desperate, he knew that he could not escape from here, his life had come to an end. And the scarlet eyes of the meter did not give him a chance to live, just slightly raised his hand, he sensed the sharp pain in his body, he only felt himself coming, his eyes began to rotate, there seemed to be a roar in his ears, he saw the roof of the laboratory was bombarded out of a huge hole, and then the most normal-looking captain of the rice country flew into it. Immediately afterward, his head hurt, and then he fell into eternal darkness. His body exploded, it was blown apart, only one head was intact, and what he had just seen was the last picture of his life. At this time, the laboratory was full of extreme blood, and the ceiling was blasted into a huge hole, and the normal-looking captain of the United States jumped into it first, and the remaining 3 captains of the United States also followed in it. There were still sirens in the laboratory, but no one showed up until half an hour later, when a team of people finally came here, and after seeing such a scene, some people were directly frightened and vomited. Immediately someone reported what happened here, and then the intelligence department began to track, they checked the surveillance, and knew that the captain of the United States was divided into 4 for unknown reasons, 3 of which had already shown great aggression, and the other one did not look much better. And when Leon got the news about the 4 captains of the United States, it was the next day, because it was a news, a small town was attacked by unknown people, and more than 40,000 people in the small town died 80%, which was simply a massacre. And Leon also learned some key information from it, although he wondered why there were 4 captains of the United States, but he felt the need to go and see, so he immediately set out to find it. The kung fu paid off, and in less than half a day, he really succeeded in finding the trail of a captain of the United States, a red-eyed captain of the United States, still the way he was when he came out of the laboratory, covered in no wisps, wandering alone in an empty city. He had killed almost all of the people in the city, and the streets were littered with bloody severed limbs and broken arms and collapsed buildings, almost like a scene after a war. And this captain of the United States stood in the street, looking up at Leon who fell from the sky, the scarlet color in his eyes, as if the killing intent of substance was coming towards Leon. Then Leon saw the captain of the United States suddenly look up and roar, and then rushed towards him. Liang's eyes shrank slightly, because he saw that there was something wrong with this captain of the United States, and its impact momentum was actually directly penetrating the space and reaching him in an instant. Captain Miguel reached out a hand, 5 fingers open, like sharp claws, and directly grabbed him with his head. The space directly around Leon was locked, as if trapped in the iron wall of the copper wall. He looked up at him, and the curiosity in his eyes became thicker. Who are you? You should not be the captain of the United States, but it is very strange, and you seem to be the captain of the United States himself. Leon shook his head and muttered, just snapping his fingers, this extremely murderous captain of the United States was directly fixed in front of him. Episode 110, Leon had complete information and intelligence about the captain of the United States, so he was also very familiar with the captain of the United States himself, and the person in front of him undoubtedly had the exact same appearance as the captain of the United States, but the card was like a beast, and there was no reason at all. What Leon saw from his eyes was only a strong desire to kill, that is, the desire to kill everything in the world. He telepathically felt his mind, but found that it was just a chaos, no self-knowledge, no personality embodiment, no thought, and some only the most primitive desire to kill. The intensity of this desire to kill made him a little shocked. He had never seen such a terrible desire to kill in anyone, it was simply unheard of. The captain of the rice country in front of him was covered with no wisps, his muscles and flesh were knotted, his 5 fingers were wide open, and his body was like a steel cast iron, full of a sense of strength, as if even steel could be torn apart by it. This is a devilish man. At this time, Leon was frozen in the space, and the appearance of his teeth and claws made people's backs chill, but Leon was now looking at him with interest. He used his telepathic ability to carefully sense the other person's mood, but in the end he failed, because he used various methods, and he could not find half a normal place in his mind, and some were only a mess. Steve, what's wrong with you? Leon wondered. The latter naturally could not respond to him, and when he lifted the blockade of this time and space, the captain of the United States, Steve, fell directly from the air, and the palm of his hand was about to press on his head. At this time, Leon could clearly see the blood stain on his palm, which was the stain left behind after he did not know how many people's blood had been stained, but he did not dodge, but gently raised his hand, and easily blocked his powerful blow. Boo! As soon as Leon shook, a circle of cracks appeared on the ground, spreading out for more than 10 meters, like a spider's web, instantly stirring up a large amount of smoke. And Leon was not shaking his body, flipped his hand to clasp Steve's wrist, pulled it with his hand, and threw his body to the ground, suddenly rumbling, making the earth collapse into a small piece. The force of this blow can be much stronger than Steve's blow. If this had been replaced by ordinary people, it would have been thrown into a pool of meat paste, but Steve did not have a look of pain. The expression on his face became more and more vicious, and the killing intention in his eyes was like substance, and he only wanted to kill the person in front of him. However, the horror of Liang's physical strength was simply not something that Steve could imagine, and with Liang's current ability, just by virtue of his physical strength, he could directly press the green fat to the ground and rub it. So it was obvious that Steve could not break free of Leon's palm and was carried by him like a broken sack, throwing it around on the ground. Boom! 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 The ground shook repeatedly, like an earthquake, and the turtle scattered one by one, making the entire ground chaotic and shapeless in a moment. And under this blow, Steve was completely confused. The scene at this time looks very good. Leon carries Steve and beats him, completely treating him as a rag, and does not care whether his physical condition can withstand it. And such a scene also made Leon have some inexplicable sense of familiarity, and when he remembered where he had seen it, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Boom! Another blow. Steve was deeply sunk 3 meters into the ground, and when he looked at him again, the blood on his body was sparkling, and his limbs were strangely twisted and bent, looking extremely frightening. Are you sober? Leon stood by the pit, looking condescendingly at Steve. The latter was thrown dizzy, the scarlet color in his eyes faded a lot, he gasped violently, his chest rose and fell, and the blood in his mouth was even more high. But even so, Stephen did not die, and the twisted limbs were strangely repaired quickly, and the repair process lasted less than 2 seconds before it was restored with a clicking sound. Well, it's very resilient. Liang's evaluation of the 8 classics. Then with a bang, Steve jumped up from the pit, without a hint of decadence, and instantly rushed to Liang, with an electric light in his hand, and his palm transformed into a blade and decapitated towards Liang's head. And the ability to transform? Liang raised an eyebrow, stood in place without half a movement. The mind power control ability was launched, changing the gravity and gravitational values on the side of his body, and then he saw that the flesh and blood blade was coming at a very fast speed, but after approaching Liang, it was like falling into the mud. The speed was getting slower and slower, and when it came to his neck, it was directly forbidden to move. The strength is very strong, just by virtue of the strength of the flesh, you can just face the green fat. Leon is still commenting. Then Steve's scarlet eyes suddenly burst into light, and the energy rose rapidly, instantly shooting out 2 beams of light, directly hitting Liang's body. Laser eye ability? Liang's interest grew, and he gently blew a breath and directly blew away the 2 laser lights, without any effort. Immediately after that, Steve's whole body burned with flames, but the moment the fire was raised, it was blown out by Liang, and the latter suddenly had only a trace of green smoke left on his body. Is it true that there are other people besides me who are also studying the fusion of abilities? Regardless of Steve's reaction, Leon directly blocked the space-time he was in again, and then pressed his hands on his temple, and launched telepathic abilities with full force. His thoughts entered the deepest part of Steve's mind, wandered in the infinite desire to kill, and then succeeded in finding his memories that had become broken by the desire to kill, which were not normal linearities, but became fragments and wandered in his mind. Leon successfully retrieved these memories, and then examined them in detail. What surprised him was the production of this Steve. The first picture was actually in the laboratory, and then he finally figured out the reason for the appearance of this Steve through careful examination. Every scene in that laboratory was clarified by him little by little, and even the experimental process was somewhat one-sided. The ultimate weapon? Is that the thing? And it's a failure, huh? He wasn't the only one? Episode 111. There are 4 splitters and Steve himself, and all 4 of them have nearly the same abilities, but the difference is that one of the 4 Steve is the ontology, and all 4 seem to have a focus. The one in front of me is the embodiment of killing desire, and there is also an ability that should be highly poisonous from the perspective of memory fragments, and the other is a corrosive ability. As for the last one, it is not clear where its focus is. Leon extracted the memory of the Steve in front of him, and then he couldn't recognize the smile. Ha ha ha, America, this is a pill, such a crazy plan has succeeded. My big deal is a few more opponents who can still look at it slightly. The key is still failing, you are sending me an assist. Leon had an idea at this moment. Since these 4 captains of the United States had lost control, then there was much more he could do. To be honest, he was very curious about this experiment of this final weapon, because the principle and idea of this experiment were actually the same as his thinking, but this experiment was too rough, and many things were not scrupulous. To know that genetic debugging is a delicate task, even Leon, before fusing other abilities, must be careful and cautious, and always have to be fully prepared before they can do it. The experimenters in the United States did not know what to think, but they actually learned mousy, rough and simple, and now there is a problem in gene fusion, the ability to run wild, not to mention, the whole person has been split into 4 new individuals, which is also a miracle in the history of biology. Hero, this is. Leon didn't know what to say about the experimenters. The captain of the rice country in front of him is one of the 4 branches, and now that he has just touched it, then for him, there is one more experimental material at the same time, but also one more help. Yes, Leon intends to subdue this Steve and thus become a puppet who belongs only to himself and obeys only his own orders, a person who is weak and always needs some help. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then opened them suddenly, and there seemed to be a vortex in his eyes, as deep as the abyss, which seemed to produce an attraction that allowed Steve's vision to improve his own investment. The moment Steve's eyes touched Leon's eyes, the scarlet color in those eyes faded a lot, and although he did not regain clarity, he also became much clearer. At this moment, Leon's will came to his mind, and the mind left its mark on his mind, helping him to build his personality and self-perception while smoothing down those killing desires. As long as Steve has self-knowledge and personality, it cannot escape Leon's control, and his telepathic ability can easily change a person's self-perception, destroy his personality, and also create a new personality. And this process does not last long, just quite troublesome. Leon's thoughts, are based on his own monstrous desire to kill, and to create for him a personality full of murderous intent, and this personality will become his body. He has the ability to know and understand other things. Although its ability to kill will be weakened, for normal people, the desire to kill in their minds can still dispel the sanity of ordinary people. Therefore, this incarnation of Steve will become a sword in Leon's hand. In the blink of an eye, it is a lot of time in the past. The shaping of a personality is not so simple, which will also involve some philosophical knowledge, although Leon is the first time to shape the personality from 0 to some, but thanks to his own strong ability, and the profound understanding of everything, the process is very smooth. A moment later, Steve opened his eyes, still a scarlet in them, but much darker than before, and not as crazy and irrational as they looked. Leon lifted the time and space blockade, but Steve stood in front of him so fixedly, the scarlet color in his eyes flashed on and off, but his expression was still calm. He seemed to be digesting something, and seemed to be understanding something. After another 5 minutes, Steve's body suddenly trembled, and then the red light in his eyes was great, but it was not the scarlet under the madness, but with some kind of intellectually killing intent. The host. He knelt down on one knee and offered his loyalty to Leon. Leon nodded and whispered, "Get up and tell me who you are." Steve stood up and looked directly at Leon, and a strong killing intent gradually rose up on his body, which was completely devoid of the previous chaos, but it seemed more condensed, like substance, making the air seem to become much thicker. "I am Steve Rogers. I am the embodiment of the desire to kill. I will kill everything in the world, bring great fear to all beings. It's called killing." Steve's voice was flat. Leon had a smile on his face and said, "Very well, you are the killing god. You will become the killing god of the universe. Yes, great host." Steve showed a bloodthirsty smile on his face, and how evil this smile looked, even on Steve's handsome face, it seemed abrupt. "Now, go and sense your brothers and see where they are." Leon rode. The brothers he refers to are the other 3 Steve Skitsmos, who originate from one subject, and naturally have a subtle connection with each other, and it is okay to say that they are telepathic, but the induction in the middle will weaken with distance, but one advantage is that they can determine the location of other splits. However, such induction, sometimes the location of the confirmation is a bit strange. As we all know, the Earth is the original. So the killing said, one is in the southeast, one is in the east, and there is another. Underground. Underground? Leon was slightly stunned, and then nodded thoughtfully. The United States compares the longitude and latitude with the location of the Earth, and it's underground. That is to the direction of Huaxia. Is it difficult to run to Huaxia in another split? Leon didn't say anything more, but directly used his telepathic ability to invade the killer's mind, obtaining that hint of induction, and the back color became strange. Episode 112. It's really in China. After confirming the coordinates of the split, Leon looked strange. After he crossed into this world, to tell the truth, he had never been to Huaxia. He obviously had a lot of business dealings with Huaxia before, but he had never thought of going to Huaxia once. If it is really said, this should be regarded as his resistance psychology. He does not know whether the Huaxia of this world is the same as the Huaxia of the previous life, although he has also learned about the Huaxia of this world through many channels, but he has a familiar strangeness to Huaxia, which is very tangled. He was afraid of seeing the familiar Huaxia in his past life, because in that case, he would not know what mood to face it, but also because his current identity had changed, and his feelings for Huaxia had also changed. It seems that I have to go to Huaxia, and I don't know if that split will also make any movement over there. Liang did not dwell too much, since he was already on the opposite side of the world. There was no need to face a certain country or force with the previous concept. There's one in the southeast and the other in the east, let's find these two first. Thinking like this, Liang said, sensing the nearest split from you, let's go. Yes, master. The killing promised very crisply, closed his eyes and slightly sensed for a moment. After opening his eyes, he directly rushed out, his body directly squeezed out of the air, and a sonic boom broke out in an instant, and a moment of kung fu had already soared into the sky. After Leon gave him a personality, the killer had wisdom and learned to think, so that he could naturally understand the incredible abilities in his body, and the use was no longer as chaotic as before. Liang naturally kept up, his body flew up, surrounded by a little reddish light. Compared to the huge movement of the killing, his movement was almost inaudible, but the speed was not slow at all, closely following the side of the killing. More than 10 minutes later, he and the two had crossed New York State to Barrie in Vermont, a city with a population of hundreds of thousands that should have been a bustling area, but when Leon arrived, all he saw was fire and smoke. The whole city was sounding loudly, and countless vehicles and soldiers were rushing in one direction, and it was no need to think that this must be the movement of the split. Well, which is this split? Leon asked. It's corrosion. The way of killing. Leon nodded, and then the two of them flew quickly in one direction, which was the most dynamic place in the whole city. When you get closer, you can see that in the middle of a wide street, a man full of red fruit is suspended above the street. He has the same appearance as Steve, and his eyes are a kind of dullness, and he has fangs, like some kind of beast, and there are drops of saliva in his mouth from time to time, which is a terrible corrosive liquid, and a drop can make the ground corrupt a large piece and smoke up. And the smoke is also strong, which can be seen only from the corpses around the ground, because after those corpses are contaminated with smoke, they will quickly dissolve into a pool of liquid, and this pool of liquid is also corrosive. It's like a chain reaction. The body fluids of that split body have a terrible corrosiveness, like a virus, with a terrible contagiousness, as if just one drop of body fluid can corrupt the whole world. At this time, he was engaged in an army, and countless shells fell in front of him, but they were blocked by a layer of strange gases, and after those shells hit these gases, they would be corroded and decomposed in an instant, turning into some strange substance and absorbed by him. He just stood so quietly, his eyes were dark black, he couldn't see half a bit of consciousness, some were just muddy. He was different from killing, he didn't have such a strong killing intention, it seemed that he would only passively defend. But from those eyes, Leon could see the coldness of indifference, like the glacier of the Arctic, frozen with an extremely terrifying existence. And this existence is the kind of outstanding ability represented by this split, corrosion. The strong corrosive force, this corrosion can now corrode the substance, but Liang felt a little threat from it, because at the same time as the green smoke rose, there was a trace of disorder in the space. This thing is so overbearing, it can even destroy the existence of space itself, although this speed of destruction is not as fast as the self-healing speed of space, but if this ability is upgraded a few steps, then even the space can be quickly corroded. He looked at it for half a moment. This split was still just passive defense. Liang watched the corrosive bodily fluids dripping. The surrounding area had been affected by the ditters, and within a few hundred meters of the surrounding area, it was in a fragile structure that could collapse at any time. The streets are corroded into fragile sand, the steel is corroded into powder, the buildings are corroded and fragile, and those who are accidentally contaminated with corrosive gases are killed in an instant, and the body is rapidly decomposing. It's really overbearing. If this family's ability continues to improve, sooner or later he can make the entire universe enter the state of heaven and man. Corrosion of the universe? Leon became interested in it, and the next moment, his figure disappeared and then appeared in front of the split. The split turned its head sharply to look at him, and there was no radiance in those dark eyes, just looking at him with extreme indifference. Liang was surrounded by a reddish light, which was the materialization of the phoenix power, but these reddish rays were flickering slightly at this time, because these phoenix forces were actually affected by the corrosive gas, with an extremely slight damage. This damage was negligible, as if a person's nails were slightly worn by a file, but it was enough to make Leon look at the split body differently. What a perfect experimental material. I must see how your corrosive ability is generated. Come, stand well, I will give you personality. This split has no personality and self-knowledge, but it is not twisted like a killer. It is still very calm, allowing Leon to approach him, but when Leon reaches out, he directly holds Leon's wrist. Episode 113. Liang frowned slightly, and he felt a tingling pain coming from his wrist, as if someone had gently picked his skin with the tip of a needle. The tingling sensation was very weak, but it still surprised him. This corrosive force is really energetic. A smile appeared on Liang's face. He did not go to block the time and space, but instead turned over his hand and clasped the wrist of the split body in front of him, and there was also a tingling pain in the palm of his hand, and even green smoke rose slightly. It was the movement caused by the corrosion of the phoenix power and the flesh, but Liang knew very well that his phoenix power and skin were not corroded much. It was only the result of his phoenix power and corrosive force resisting each other. Immediately afterward, Liang violently pulled the split in front of him to the front, and the other hand shook his fist and waved at him, and the latter immediately reacted and made a blocking action, which was an instinctive reaction. Boo! Liang's punch was carried with the power of the phoenix, although it was not full strength, but there were not many people on the earth who could block his punch now. Click! The split head was directly exploded by him, and the red and white things splashed, and after these body tissues splashed out, they directly turned into a cloud of corrosive fog, enveloping all the surrounding areas. The streets were hatched again, and the objects contaminated by the corrosive fog. The steel was corrupted into fly ash, the tall buildings were also corroded and collapsed, and the streets directly became a rotten substance like black sand, all emitting smoke. At the same time, a part of the corrosive fog flew back and merged into the body of the split, and the broken head of the split body also recovered rapidly at this time, and in less than a second, the head had recovered as before. At this time, this split in front of Liang also counterattacked, opening his mouth violently, and a large cloud of black smoke flew out of his mouth, directly enveloping Liang's body. Liang immediately felt the changes around him, the power of the phoenix that protected him, and at this time it was flickering in bursts, and the frequency was much stronger than what he wanted. Well, the corrosion ability of this black mist is nearly 100 times stronger than the corrosive gas that lingers around it, and the consumption speed of my own phoenix power has also increased a lot. Liang was secretly a little shocked, but he was only slightly surprised, because the consumption of the phoenix's power now was not a problem for him at all. He was now the most well-known villain boss on the earth, his own ability was strong to an uncountable extent, this corrosive force, he easily resisted it in minutes, and he only had a trace of negligible damage. And this little bit of damage is like a nail being filed 2 or 3 times by a file. The ability experiment is almost over, so let's finish it. Liang snapped his fingers, and the void of this split itself was blocked, and the split body was naturally forbidden to move, and the black mist was directly induced by Liang to the phoenix power around him, which was clean. As if dealing with a killer, he pressed his hands to the holes on either side of his head, and his thoughts went deep into his mind, first checking his memory. The memory of this split is similar to that of killing, the memory also shows the appearance of fragments, and the source of the record also begins in that laboratory, and Leon also sees the scene when the laboratory is raging. The fragments of memory were sorted out, and Liang saw the whole process of this split coming here, quite speechless, because this split was completely a mess compared to the endless killing thoughts in the killing brain, no self, no personality, acting entirely by instinct, even the nature of animals is not as good, there is no concept at all. It is very likely that 1 second is still a harmless person, and the next second will become a person who kills like a person with boundless thoughts on the side of killing, more likely to find a place to sleep directly, and may also use the ability to move around in space. Yes, although this split has amazing corrosion ability, it actually has other abilities on its body, and there are many abilities. Forget it, get him a personality first. Without much thought, Leon began to sort out his mushy brain, bring him new cognition, give him a new personality, and at the same time instill the idea of obeying himself, just like dealing with killing. This process did not last long, and in less than 10 minutes, Leon completed the task of creating personality for this split. The split was motionless in this process, because the time and space he was in were sealed by the sealed ice, and he couldn't move if he wanted to, but as time went on, the dark color in his eyes was a lot darker, and a trace of the unique spirituality of intelligent creatures gradually flashed in it. When this process was completed, Leon lifted the space blockade and knelt down on one knee in midair, with indifference. The host. The voice was cold, there was no mood swing, it was cold like a piece of ice. Leon knew that he had succeeded, and he deliberately created a calm personality for this split, because the ability of this product was too prominent, and if the personality was not calm enough, it was estimated that it would easily run away. In that case, the value of this split would be greatly reduced for Leon. He wanted an obedient puppet, not a prisoner who could not control his own power. You have the ability to corrupt all things, and in the future, you can even easily incubate the universe itself, and your growth is extremely strong, so I will give you a name for this ability. Liang said with a slight deep groan for a moment, and then the corners of his mouth drew a smile, and then said, "From now on, you will be called Corruption, simple and clear, just like your ability." "Yes, master." The sound of hatching is still cold. Liang smiled and nodded, looking at the hatching in front of him, turning his head to look at the killing not far away, the smile on his face was very bright. He suddenly had 2 amazing ability subordinates, and he also had his own team, not a light rod commander. killing, corruption, and another split in the east. I just don't know what his abilities are. If you add the one in Huaxia, this is 4. If I can control the other 2 branches, then I have 4 apostles. At the same time that Leon was making a move on the hatching, the attack of the army over there had stopped, because they had already seen the comers, and Leon's presence made them extremely afraid. Episode 114. The soldiers in the distance had already stopped attacking, and even when Leon started to instill the corruption and indoctrinate his personality, he had already begun an orderly retreat. Until the end of the matter, the soldiers present had withdrawn a large half, and the remaining small and half of the people saw Leon look at this time, and one by one, their faces suddenly changed greatly, full of panic. Because in their view, although corruption is terrible, it is still in the category of mutants, and even if he is very powerful, he can always find a way to deal with it. But Leon. He is really already a powerful incomprehensible, all his deeds, all of which have horrified the whole world, and the facts have proved many times that Leon is the god of the earth, the insoluble terror. At the same time, Leon turned his head to look at the soldiers who had not yet withdrawn, feeling his bland gaze. All of them were excited, and at the same time, their backs were cold, and some of them even screamed out loud, subconsciously wanting to raise their guns to fight back. But due to the terrible pressure of Leon, no one dared to shoot and anger him at this time, and everyone was silent, and there was no sound in the middle of the field. Leon just shrugged and said, "Let's go." The soldiers thought they had heard wrongly, but after reacting, they were even more reluctant to stay here, and suddenly retreated into the distance sweating. Leon ignored these people. For him, there was no need to take a shot at ordinary people. He wanted to bring pressure to the world, not his own killing to ordinary people. That was not what he sought. "Let's go find another of you split." Leon said that when he flew to the east first, the speed was extremely fast, killing and corruption quickly followed, and the two flew up at the same time, and also looked at each other. Both of them had a sense of novelty for each other, and at the same time there was a feeling of already familiar and strange. Both are separated from a subject, and there is an inexplicable connection between them, and it is not an exaggeration to think of the two as a whole or as independent individuals, and it is not an exaggeration to say that they are brothers of a mother and a sibling. I just don't know which of these 4 subdivisions is the subject. Leon had learned a lot from the fragments of their memories, and the reasons for their experiments and their respective divisions had been found by him. It has been said before that this experiment is too rough and simple. Those experimenters just mixed all the abilities together, although there have been debugging, but the drawbacks have not been lifted at all, so directly connected to Steve's body, bringing extremely exaggerated changes to himself, making him a special mutant with many variant abilities. And such a consequence is only one, incompatible with each other. Just imagine, a balloon with a limited volume, have to inject more air into it, the final knot, there will only be one result, and that is the explosion. Unfortunately, the results of the experiment that happened to Steve were that too many mutant abilities seemed to be compatible with each other, but in fact there was a difficult conflict at the genetic level, and the consequence was that Sher could not control his various mutant abilities, tearing his body apart. And if this tear is replaced by ordinary, it will definitely be torn into flesh, and thanks to Steve's own super soldier serum, he has a far beyond ordinary human bottom, a super healing ability among many mutant abilities, so that his tear is divided into 4 points, and these 4 points are fused into new individuals. In this way, one Steve becomes 4, because they have nearly the same genes, but because the mutant genes become different, but like quadruplets, there is only a very small gap between their genes. This also caused 4 individuals, all with similar abilities, but with different emphases on each other. One for unknown reasons, activated the hidden killing attribute in the gene, and became lethal. The other was dumbfounded, simply knowing how to follow instincts, and Leon now estimated that the remaining 2 splits must also be strange creatures similar to killing and corruption. Yes, Leon had positioned these 4 people as strange creatures, because he was now a little unsure whether these 4 people were human or not. From a genetic point of view, the 4 branches are definitely human, but from the perspective of mutant genes, these 4 people have fused too many mutant abilities, and the genes are mixed, which is still a normal human. This thought only swirled in his mind, and was directly removed by him, because in his opinion, the 4 branches only needed to become his subordinate puppets, and nothing else mattered. Soon more than 10 minutes passed, and Leon did not use the teleportation ability, but chose to fly, because the distance between the split bodies was very weak, and he could only sense the general direction, and his teleportation was not easy to position. It is a wilderness, a primeval forest with tall trees, dense vegetation, and a variety of animals hiding in it. And the killer told him that the split was in this forest. He did not see the breath of a person in the forest, but there were 2 splits nearby, and it was not too difficult to find this one, and the 3 of them had only searched in the forest for a few minutes, and Leon had already found a strange breath. Leon looked down over the forest at this time, and the forest trees not far away were covered by a number of strange gelatinous objects, covering an area of thousands of square meters, which showed a turbid transparent color. The strange thing is that this gelatin is frantically absorbing free energy, mainly absorbing the heat energy of sunlight. As if sensing the arrival of the three people, a figure appeared on the gelatinous object. That figure was completely inhuman, 6 legs and 6 hands and a total of 12 limbs, at this time oozing from the gelatinous material, and its figure lying on the gelatin resembled a huge spider. Leon saw this split, and the appearance of Steve, and struck a cold glow in his eyes, as if to treat Leon as a prey, and opened his mouth to spit out a large piece of gelatinous substance from his mouth, like a spider's web, and pounced on him. Interesting, what is this ability? Leon looked at the flying gel without any fear, but instead smiled. Episode 115, Spider-Man? Leon smiled and looked at the gummy cobwebs that flew in, his eyes fixed on it, his mind moved, and the time around him became extremely slow, just like the whole world entered a slow play mode, from 2x to 4x to 8x, everything in the world was slowed down. In fact, it is not that he has slowed down time, but that he himself has entered the mode of slow passage of time, and this hand is extremely easy for him. In this state, he can easily observe the colloidal cobweb. As his gaze drew closer, the structure in the cobwebs was clearly explored by him, only to find that this was actually a completely new element. Even if he had never seen it, the combination between molecules was extremely tight, the strength was higher than steel, and the toughness was extremely strong, and even he found that this thing was not afraid of fire, and the corrosion resistance was super strong. This material alone, ordinary mutants cannot deal with. There is still a strong stickiness on it, more than 1,000 times more viscous than spider silk. Leon broke away from the slow mode, and the colloidal cobwebs flew directly towards him with the sound of whistling wind, and instantly arrived in front of him. He raised his hand, and the mind control was like water flowing out, instantly wrapping the colloidal cobweb, which hovered in front of him strangely, and then more eerily spontaneously combusted. The flame was reddish, the temperature was not very high, but it was under this flame that the colloidal cobwebs were rapidly dissolving. No, it should be said that it is decomposition, because it is only a breathing effort, and the colloidal cobwebs directly become a ball of fly ash. And the split not far away, after seeing this scene, did not show any look of fear, but faintly revealed a color of curiosity, and was carefully looking at Leon, and that curious look was more like the novelty of the hunter after seeing the prey. Because this split also has no personality and self-knowledge, but Leon can feel that he does not understand, this split seems to be more inclined to animals, and that instinct is much stronger than killing and corruption. Aha! Before Leon could move, he felt the strong wind in front of him, and he saw this split body rush to him in an instant, like a spider-like body, but it was extremely flexible, for hands were open, and the 5 fingers on each hand were with sharp claws, which could easily pierce through steel. Leon curiously let him get close, the latter's sharp claws stabbed directly at his eyes and neck. The fierce wind had blown in front of Leon, and the average person would definitely have a tingling scalp, but Leon was still good at a good time. Dang! A crisp crashing sound, but the split hand had already hit Liang's neck. This powerful but rapid and fierce blow did not let Leon be injured, but issued a crisp sound of gold and iron strike. And the performance of the split body can only be like this, because of the hand. The split body is firmly locked in front of him by his mind control, just like a monster with teeth and claws, and there is a sense of comical in Li. Let me see what you went through when you escaped from the lab. Liang's eyes lit up slightly, the telepathic ability was launched, the thought went directly into his mind, and he immediately saw many pictures. These pictures were similar to the pictures obtained from the killing and the mind, all starting from the laboratory, following a split to escape from the laboratory. This split directly used the ability to move in space, appeared in this forest, and then really regarded himself as an animal, and actually learned to hunt without a teacher. So far, there are no less than 100 small animals buried in the hands of this split, which makes Leon cry and laugh. This split is really too strange. Then Leon understood that what this split was good at was change, somewhat similar to the ability of the demon woman, but because of the genetic enhancement and fusion, this ability was terrifyingly changed, and he could even change into a variety of different creatures, or he could combine his body at will, even if it became a human centipede tens of meters long. Thinking of this, Leon is a little cold, and the focus of this split is really a bit strange. Forget it, no matter what the focus of your ability is, it will always be my puppet, and I will give you personality and self-knowledge, and later. You are the aberration of my men. It took Leon to reapply the old law, which took about 10 minutes to eliminate the confusion of the distortion of his mind, and then gave him a new personality and self-awareness, and did not give him the idea of obeying himself, which was a double insurance, so that he would not make any resistance to him, because this personality was born by him, and he could give him a new personality with one thought. At the same time, Leon let go of the physical restriction on the distortion, who landed firmly at the top of a tree with him, and then saw the aberrant body begin to change, and the overgrown hands and feet quickly retracted into the body, and then his body became a normal human form. At this time, it seems that the distorted appearance is no different from ordinary people. There is no difference, but the ability hidden deep in its body is changeable. Very strange. The host. Distortion knelt down on one knee and offered loyalty to Leon. Liang smiled slightly when he saw this. Up to now, he had already subdued these 3 Steve splits. One was killing thoughts, and definitely a god-killing level existence. The other is corruption, whose ability is focused, can corrupt everything in the world. Even the existence of space itself can be corrupted. If his ability is stronger, the universe is a being that can be corrupted at any time for him. As for the third is distortion, its ability focuses on changing shapes, but it is not so simple as different deformations. He can freely combine his body. Kaleidoscopic is only the most basic ability, and even in Liang's estimation, in the future, under the improvement of his ability, he can change the size, larger than the universe, less than the molecule. All of a sudden, Liang accepted 3 more Tiger Generals, and there were more things he could do to the whole world in the future. Now let's sense where the last split is. Leon ordered. All 3 closed their eyes at the same time, and then their colleagues opened their eyes. He's moving. The way of killing. Very fast. Corruption road. He feels us. Distortion of the channel.